So how do we explain the Saturnian ring symbology or all these other symbols? Again, it's all this ancient archetype. It's that you would look into heaven and you would see dramatically different things. The rings of Saturn have now been measured, and they have been found that they might just deteriorate in the next 10,000 years. They can't have been millions and millions of years old. So the halo that goes around the saints, or all those depictions of Christ with a halo. A lot of people would be confused and frustrated to find out that a lot of the origins of symbology from Catholicism is this built-in Saturn worship. So you have crowns as well that come from this symbology. You have circled crosses. You have the Eye of Ra as another Saturn symbol. All of these have been identified as such by archaeologists. Here's another fun little slide again of that Heaven Man symbol and how it's found all over the earth in petroglyphs. Again, if every culture is separate, if every culture is disparate and not related, why would they all depict something unless they are connected or they all saw the same thing in the heavens and then depicted it as a petroglyph? So that idea of something in heaven being visible from earth and you carve it in a rock. So a lot of scientists, as they've looked into it, well, I shouldn't say a lot, because this is a very niche little group of scientists that can find themselves studying this. But they would do these sustained plasma experiments, and in that they would find this slow progression of plasma instability, and it would create shapes, and these shapes would become somewhat recognizable as a lot of the symbols of in ancient drawings.
So what do you mean plasma?
So plasma, electricity, essentially, as a sustained force, the movement of superheated electrons sustained inside of a vacuum. They would do experiments with that energy surge, and it would create these instabilities. So you can also think of it as a plasma sphere that you can get at any little, gift shop, where it has that little metal ball in the center, the glass on the outside, you touch your finger and it has the little electrical connection. Those kinds of electrical connections at times became visible. Right now we can't see it, but electricity is filling the atmosphere, not only in our air, but all throughout space. The Earth is connected to the Sun through magnetism. It has magnetic spheres, if you want to think of it that way, connecting, protecting the Earth. Magnetism cannot exist without electricity being present, creating the magnetism, and vice versa. Electricity can't exist without creating some form of magnetism. All of these things are connected. So you can't, a lot of scientists think of the universe and they think of it as just nothing but empty space. But it is full of this electrical atmosphere. We're just condensed inside of our air atmosphere, so it's a little different for us. We interpret it differently. So as they would do these experiments in the lab and have these symbols show up, they started relating it to the thunderbolts of the gods, the trident, the sword of Ares, the lightning bolt of Zeus, all of these symbols throughout these ancient cultures of gods and their wrath and anger were depicted by things that you don't see in our current culture. Where did that symbology come from? If you project this out, it actually eventually turns into the menorah too.
Oh,
These
that makes sense. Look at the bottom right one.
These symbols, these electrical occurrences, were associated with plasma discharges. And if you can think of plasma as not just that little globe that you touch and nothing happens, but magnify that, because electricity experimentally is scalable. Totally scalable, as infinite big as it does infinite small. When you take that to infinite big and you think about how powerful that plasma would be as a column, as a pillar of fire, you would have a lightning bolt that would not consume a tree.
So I was reading just the other day, Nikolai Tesla had discovered that, there was all this free electricity, and he was completely discredited and sabotaged because they said if we can't meter it and sell it, we don't want to hear about it.
Exactly.
And
So
this is so beautiful.
The definition of corrupt people who want to control you, controlling history, controlling what knowledge you're able to access, has confined us to a world where we pay for something that should be free.
Yeah.
So we are in that captivity without realizing it. Because we've had 100
realize
years.
it.
But in general,
Yeah.
there's 100 years of education system telling you that that stuff doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So you see again in these ancient symbols of the gods, their weapons being something we don't use as weapons. The trident is not a convenient weapon for warfare. So why would the gods use it? Why would that be connected? Not only to just,
Well, it looks like it's for power. It's representing power, maybe?
It is. It's a representation of power and of destructive ability. But that is throughout cultures. It is India, China, Greece, everywhere you look. Also, back to, and I don't mean to apologize, but in the back table there, you mentioned the divine right of kings. That is also all echoed in this heaven symbology. And again, what are we doing in our temples but ordaining kings? We have these same divine right symbologies. So you have the placement of head adornment. You have this one on the far left, specifically they think was the shape of a discharge between Mars and Venus at one point. The Statue of Liberty and its 7 lights coming off of it is a very Venus symbol. Also, when you place your hand forward in a shape as if you were maybe holding a cup of water, and a globe is placed in your hand as anointing you a king. All both king and temple symbology. And the globe he's holding, a lot of people interpret it as the earth globe. But an earth doesn't have a ring, and an earth is not crowned by a shape representing a cross.
Looks like a Leahona.
Yeah, it does.
So all of these symbols get misinterpreted as well. And so we get to our day, and you get a lot of people who not only misinterpret, but then assign devious purposes to these symbols. You even have cults surrounding these symbols doing evil things that then give a bad name to the symbol itself. But it's not the symbol that's evil, it's the person's actions that are evil. So when we look at a lot of this stuff, a lot of people think of it as, oh, that's sorcery or witchcraft or evil divining. And it's because Satan has created perversions of all of these things. And not just one perversion, but hundreds of cultures have slowly corrupted these symbols and their meanings. So Venus as well has a similar diversity of names in all these ancient cultures. Freya, Diana, Ishtar, Esther, Phosphorus, Lucifer, Dionysus, Isis, Inanna, Noek. And I'll get to Mars in a second, but the name Israel is, in Egyptian, Isis, Ra, and El, which is the gods of Venus, Mars, and Saturn. So Venus is capable of brilliance and beauty, but also directly connected to this same mythology of Venus is her corruption turning into the Medusa, where instead of brilliant light coming off of Venus, it becomes chaotic, it becomes snake-like, it becomes destructive, and it petrifies. So with Venus and her sight, you have instant destruction, instant petrification. So one fun evidence of that, a hammer found petrified in stone, a boot found with a foot in it, made of limestone. They actually took the boot that was found in Texas took it to the manufacturer because the label was still identifiable. The manufacturer in 1950 confirmed that they had produced this boot.
Wow.
Yet it had a petrified limestone human foot in it.
Wow.
Wait, the guy, who's the one that does the UN theory?
Oh, yeah, a universal model?
Universal model,
Yeah.
right, where he shows you can do it in weeks, right?
Yes.
Because how would you have petrified
No, so-
dinosaur poop, right? It would just- Yeah.
Yes.
Or fishes in the act of giving birth, or
Yeah.
mammoths literally in the act of digesting and eating,
Yeah.
etc. So while not the focus of, it's directly connected. All of these electrical events to change the state of matter. We all think of it as myth. We're all taught that alchemy is a false science. Yet the transformation, transmutation of one object to another is possible with enough energy and the right circumstances encountering an object all at one time. So you have not only the universal model, this idea of accelerated sedimentary layers forming, water being a great multiplier of that effect, but with enough energy you scale that further and you could have instant petrification. So Lot's wife turns around, looks towards Medusa, looks towards an event of a destroying of a city, and is instantly petrified.
With your research, did they figure out how that had happened?
No. No, so again, most science doesn't want to even admit this kind of evidence exists. So there's very limited research into the how.
It disproves everything that they tried to date
Yes.
prior to.
Right.
Again, the ice dating. They say, oh, this is 10,000 years. This is 10,000 years as they drill these cores into the ice. And then they go back to recover some left behind supplies, and they discover the ice accreting at 10 times the rate, 100 times the rate that they assumed. So these ice cores are not an accurate
So
dating
they're
method.
guessing.
Yes. It's the same thing with
Yeah.
sedimentary layers. They're guessing with
Yeah.
all this stuff. Another fun symbol of that Venus event is that the scar across the face of Mars. The Thunderbolts Project people have a fun little video theorizing that that scar was carved in one consistent event. A storm, if you will. A war in heaven as the dragon fought Michael. As Venus passed by Mars and created a pillar of plasma carving across Mars, creating that scar.
Wow.
The fun video from the Thunderbolts Project, they go into all this evidence of the actual topography, the shapes, the deposits, and they illustrate how none of it could be formed by erosion, but all of it is identical to the results you get when you do plasma sanding. Plasma sanding is an industrial process we do all the time today to cut objects, and it creates very specific results, and you can find all those evidences, including the spheres and the certain shapes of carving on Mars, as well as the matter, the dust being thrown and deposited in its patterns. They have a fun video on that. So Mars also has several names: Ares, Hercules, Horus, Nergal, Mangala, Bahram, Tiyu, Zipe, Morning Star, Ravana, Typhon, Enceladus. All these different cultures. One of my favorites, again, that lends a little evidence towards this, is Nergal. Nergal is the pestilent planet. So again, if this is a dot that is so far away you have to have telescopes to discover that it's even red, how would an ancient culture depict Nergal as a pimpled god? And you can see there, pimples on the face of Mars from the mountains created again by that plasma event. For I am no respecter of persons, and I will that all men shall know that the day speedily cometh. The hour is not yet, but is nigh at hand, when peace shall be taken from the earth, and the devil shall have power over his own. Now imagine being on the earth during an event like what happened to Mars, or what happens when these flybys of the Exodus events happen, peace being taken from the earth. We're not in that state yet.
Actually, in one of the conference talks, he said that it is happening.
We're losing peace, yes, as a globe, but I would contend, and you can again take my words with a grain of salt, but I would contend the peace being taken from the earth in a cosmological sense is obviously not here. When it comes to there being wars everywhere, sure, but those wars haven't directly affected me. Individually, I've had a very peaceful life. But globally, for every person to lose their peace, and I'll get to a couple more, but that idea of all men being shaken such they cannot stand, those kinds of events are yet to happen, but they are precursors for what is to come with the second coming. For not many days hence, and the earth shall tremble and reel to and fro as a drunken man. Again, think of these ancient scriptural depictions of the sun staying still for days, of there being darkness for days, of mountains moving. All of these events, as seen by our current science, says, oh, that's impossible. The earth can't possibly have the sun stay in a single place for a day. It's constantly moving. There's no way. Yet, in the world of an electric universe theory, with chaotic planet movement, you can have these kinds of events. You can have delayed momentum. You can have collapses and destructions that are planetary wide scale. And reel to and fro like a drunken man, and the sun shall hide his face, and shall refuse to give light, and the moon shall be bathed in blood, and the stars shall become exceedingly angry, and shall cast themselves down as a fig that falleth from off a fig tree. A lot of the depictions of these angry cherubim or angels or things are really strange to us. And if you were to draw them, it would look like a human being, angel. The depictions of crickets or horses with flaming hair, these are all interpretations, I believe, of meteor events, comet symbology, of these electrical occurrences that are then interpreted by people who don't have our same language. So they're giving it different words and symbolism.
And something too, the moon being bathed in blood, they used to only fight during the daytime. Now we have night vision.
Yeah. So after your testimony cometh the wrath and indignation upon the people. So again, this is God talking to Joseph about he will preach and then will come these events. For after your testimony cometh the testimony of earthquakes, that shall cause groaning in the midst of her, and men shall fall upon the ground and shall not be able to stand. An earthquake so powerful you can't physically bring yourself to lift yourself off the ground. Why do you think they're reinforcing the Salt Lake Temple to withstand a magnitude 15 scale earthquake?
Wow.
That's not cheap.
That's scary.
Yeah. Well,
So don't become too attached to your
maybe
house.
somewhere else. Yeah, that's right.
People that say that, temples will all be protected, it's like, well, what happened to the Houston one with the flood, and what happened to
Yeah.
Nauvoo and to,
They might be building so many so that some of them do
Will survive.
live through while
Yeah.
others
Yeah.
experience the catastrophes, because we're not being told specifically where these storms will come. And also cometh the testimony of the voice of thunderings, and the voice of lightnings, and the voice of tempests, and the voice of the waves of the sea heaving themselves beyond their bounds. Imagine not a tidal wave, but an ocean covering a continent. That much volume of water moving. These are the kind of catastrophes. The symbolism of the Exodus events is echoed in the book of Revelation. It has the same archetypes. Again, from ancient cultures, they depicted the same kind of thing. This loud noise, the trumpets approaching. Destruction of water, fish in the water, massive fires, just catastrophe after catastrophe is echoed in the Exodus events. And the book of Revelation has very similar depictions of some coming events. And all things shall be in commotion, and surely men's hearts shall fail them, for fear shall come upon them. Wherefore be not deceived, but continue in steadfastness, looking forth for the heavens to be shaken, and the earth to tremble, and to reel to and fro as a drunken man, and for the valleys to be exalted, and for the mountains to be made low, and for the rough places to become smooth. And all this when the angel shall sound his trumpet. So to me, understanding some of this cosmological symbology, when an approaching planet comes, the noise becomes deafening as an electrical exchange begins. That approaching planet or comet and its tail being charged in some certain way could turn all the water on Earth toxic and red. Then as it continues to approach, the pestilences and diseases that could come from those would be intense. The reason why Velikovsky theorized that Venus had a hydrocarbon atmosphere is because he theorized that that atmosphere interacting with Earth's atmosphere, like oil can be turned into food, these hydrocarbons were rained down as manna, as rivers of milk and honey. And so, again, from this perspective of plasma sanding can make a nearly smooth surface because of what it's attracted to as it exchanges discharges. So your mountains would be laid low and your valleys exalted as plasma sands the earth. There will be wars and rumors of wars, signs in the heavens above and on the earth beneath, the sun turned into darkness and the moon to blood, earthquakes in diverse places, the seas heaving them beyond their bounds. Then will one grand sign of the Son of Man will appear, one grand sign of the Son of Man in heaven. This is Joseph Smith saying that you're going to get a lot of catastrophes. Then you will see it. What will you see? But what will the world do? They will say it is a planet, a comet. You can think of all these disaster movies. We're kind of being conditioned.
Who created it?
So this comet, this planet coming, the world will say, oh, that's the result. That's all it is. Mm-hmm. So Joseph isn't saying they're wrong that it's a planet or comet coming. He's saying that that's all they will think it is. Mm-hmm. But the Son of Man will come as a sign of the coming of the Son of Man, which will be as the light of the morning cometh out of the east. So we will experience intense catastrophes. Who knows what percentage of the world may live through it, 1 or 2. The Jews have a tradition that we all are kind of taught, well, the Exodus events, the Egyptians were the ones that died. The Jews have a tradition that 1 to 2 out of 100 survived the Exodus events. Wow. So they were wiped out right along with the Egyptians as those events occurred. And then they were able to escape. And the Thunderbolt Project people have a fun theory on how that electrical exchange could create the separation of the waters too. But that idea of massive disasters and then the approaching planet is seen. We are meant to be returned to a restoration of all things. The fall didn't happen because Adam and Eve took that apple and gave it to every animal and plant on earth to make sure everything fell. The fall was a literal movement of the earth. And to be restored. So you have Saturn and its conjoined planets and Earth. You have the introduction of the sun creating the crescent. You have the fall. Then for 1,000 years, that was a visible thing in the sky as this culture developed of Adam's descendants with all of their wickedness, the Nephilim, all those kinds of things, creating a toxic world where in the original state it was a Garden of Eden paradise. Plants, the animals, everything was different. Gravity was different. The atmosphere was twice as dense. There were so many things different that it could be a Garden of Eden. Not only in a spiritual sense of being able to be where a perfect being could live, but in a physical sense, it supported eternal life. Then as that split, death was introduced into the world. The world moved from a celestial orbit to a terrestrial orbit. Then, after the flood and the parting of the land again, you have the world descend into a telestial orbit. And once again, men's lives become so much shorter. Instead of dying after 1,000 years, they die after 100. We are in a telestial world. To be brought into a celestial world again, the same transition must take place. A planet will come. It will change our orbit. We will move from a telestial to a terrestrial sphere. And the wicked cannot abide that. So they must perish. And in that terrestrial sphere, it will be a millennial reign of Christ. It will be so beautiful and glorious. But there is still one more event to occur as the earth moves to a celestial sphere and is purified and glorified. After 1,000 years, it will be cleansed with fire. So when you understand a little bit of the, again, all theory, I'm not getting angel visitations about this, so grain of salt, research it yourself. The only thing you should be relying on here is if the Spirit's confirming this is true. But if these symbols are correct, if the science behind these symbols, connecting these symbols are correct, this is one of the greatest witnesses to Joseph Smith's prophetic power to receive a revelation and teach about something that the world was not only completely ignorant of, but there was no research, there were no texts for him to draw this from. There was nothing for him to translate to get this information. Yet he depicted this alignment of planets, this movement of the earth, and taught it to the apostles originally. And as a doctrine, it was taught in temples to a small degree, but again, it's one of those things today that's a mystery. A lot of people are not, they're still on milk level, if not watered down milk level. And this is definitely neat. But people who are, I believe, struggling with the way the world teaches science and symbolism, a lot of our youth get lost going to a college, going through our education system, being taught all of this science theory that contradicts everything we know religiously. But I believe and have a testimony that God has all power, that all the power he has is not only miracles, but understandable miracles. And as we progress line upon line, we'll be capable of this kind of stuff, understanding it and someday becoming like him and shaping the worlds ourselves. And if we can understand the symbology behind this, if we can understand the flaws of the scientific theory, how Big Bang has so many holes in it, then we can understand that a lot of these things taught by the world are meant to ensnare us. They're meant to pull us away from the principles of Christ. All of these parables that are taught in these symbols. But our testimony can grow a lot more firm the more we can recognize how we're being deceived and what truth is. I say that in the name of Jesus Christ.
Great, thank you.
So I do have a myriad more slides I didn't include because this is my first time ever doing this kind of thing. But first I just want to ask if there's any questions.
Are you saying that Saturn is Kolob?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So have you ever done any calculations to see when Saturn, Venus, and Mars are all aligned like that?
No. So again, I'm very amateur into this, right? The people I would look to the most for this kind of research in symbology. Oh, actually, go. So I have a few books here. Anthony Larson, if any of you are familiar with him. And The Moon Shall Turn to Blood is his first one, written in the 80s. And I would, again, take everything with a grain of salt. He even said himself that he originally kind of misinterpreted that original alignment being Jupiter instead of Saturn. Anciently, Jupiter was one of the names of Saturn. So that's a fun one. But Anthony Larson, he just passed away a couple years, well, was it a year ago? I think it was only just a year ago. His books are great. He has a website called mormonprophecy.blogspot where he gets into a lot of this symbology. He would teach lectures. He had you'd have to pay for them, but he had this pay-for lecture series as well as a in-person Book of Revelation series that he would teach. Really great stuff. Again, a lot of it just kind of cementing the scriptural side of it, because the majority of the world that looks into this kind of stuff are not coming at it from a gospel perspective. And he was connecting all these scriptures, Habakkuk and just prophecy after prophecy, to these kinds of symbolisms. So his 3 books are great. His website's awesome.
Say it again,
Oh, okay.
his website.
His website, mormonprophecy.blogspot. Another one I really like, he's about my age. His name's Leland Tanner. He has a YouTube channel by his name. He has a series he's been doing called Eternal Perspectives. He's about like 13 videos in. All the videos are 2, 3, 4 hours each. And he gets into a lot of this symbology as well as a lot of other stuff. A lot of esoteric, a lot of Masonic symbology. He gets into the Whitestone thesis, and a lot of his stuff is very fun. Again, a very faithful, gospel-based researcher for this kind of symbology. On the science side, I love the Thunderbolts Project. I watched all their videos. Again, I've only been into this for about 3 years, but they have hundreds of videos to choose from. And every paradigm of science that I've been raised believing has had either a shattering or a new interpretation introduced by these guys. A structured atom model, an electric life theory, the sacred numerology or sacred geology. They talk about all that stuff. They talk about ancient mythology and the symbolism of it. They connect it to what's called electric universe theory.
Can you go back one? I just.
Oh, just, yeah.
So the overarching theory is called electric universe theory. They have a lot of scientific evidence that they present. They get a lot of garbage from the world calling them crackpots, so a lot of their research isn't necessarily peer-reviewed, but they will get into topics that will just blow your mind.
Doesn't that remind you of Carrie Guthrie's painting when she's having this spiritual experience and it comes around like that?
That's right.
Yeah.
Baptism of fire.
Yeah.
So those are a lot of the people I research their stuff to root myself into cutting edge science, cutting edge research into this idea. I'm going to show this one too. This one's really fun. So I talked a little bit about essentially the capture, our sun capturing the orbit of Saturn and its planets. And how could that work? Because the way we're taught gravity works, it's just this well of mass pulling on each other. That's not how gravity works. Gravity is not simply mass-based, or else they wouldn't need to invent dark matter, which only exists in computer models, and every time they measure something, they have to correct and say, well, dark matter makes up 40% of the universe, 70% of the universe. Now it's 95% of the universe, this unmeasurable matter that explains how gravity works when we can't explain it based on, okay, in space, that shouldn't work. Gravity doesn't work like that here. But universalitarianism, everything works like it works here, so how do we project this theory of gravity out there? We invent dark matter. And the theory keeps falling apart. So this is called quantum locking. It's a fun little explanation of an electrical...
So what if we got here?
So we have quantum locking. The superconductor is locked in space, and it stays wherever I put it. You see, this is quantum trapping.
Amazing.
As long as it's
so it's superconducting. It's frozen with liquid nitrogen.
Upside down.
Right.
And it stays locked.
So the fact that it's superconducting is locking the magnetic field in 3 dimensions, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that pivots.
Because this is symmetric, it can rotate without break the locking. The locking doesn't break.
Right.
Because
so it stays there on the X and Y, but not on. But it pivots on the...
Yeah, on the axis of the magnet. You see, if I can move it on the side, it will again pivot around the axis of the magnet, because it makes sure that the magnetic field inside of it stays the same.
Right.
Okay.
It's astonishing. Can you put it on the track for us?
Yeah. I just left it above the track quite high, and I can just rotate it.
So it's actually floating above the
Think of the
surface.
physics.
Yeah, it's not floating, it's locked.
Well, think about the Great Pyramids and those giant stones.
Yeah.
Levitated over there. Or
That's interesting.
Around like this.
Machu Picchu and all those stones that just moved by levitation,
Lock
you
it at
bet.
night.
Lock it, yeah, different height, different configuration. And I can even lock it opposite
Holds it
way.
on the track.
If you could just hold it for a minute.
It keeps it in place.
I'm doing the
So
same
it can
thing.
hang
I'm
upside
locking it upside down, and then
Oh my gosh.
Is that
it
cool?
is suspended.
Fantastic. Okay.
Science fiction. ASTC.
So, gravity is not a mass force of mass attracting mass. Gravity is an electromagnetic force. Gravity is a force of charge, ionic charge, pulling on ionic charge, and it can create a lock. So the Earth rotates around the sun not by chance and not by accident, but through this electromagnetic grab. So it locks it in place. You can think of this man as the hand of the Lord putting the Earth in a location and pushing its movement.
And it keeps going.
And it stays in a balance. It stays locked. The electrical discharges from the sun mirror. When the sun is at a low, the Earth discharges more through the form of more volcanoes and more activity to essentially retain where it's locked magnetically.
What was that event that they were at?
Oh, it was a scientific conference.
Well, I remember on my mission, when Bruce R. McConkie, I listened to this over and over again, called The Infinite Atonement, and he talked about in the pre-earth life how we accepted the terms and the conditions that the Lord set forth under the Father's plan. And that's why Satan's trying to take, he didn't say this part, but it just hit me, those terms and conditions, here, that locking in, you know. He
And
was the
we're-
creator.
And we're in a system where our scientists are messing with how those work.
Yes.
They're trying to rebel against them. You have Bill Gates trying to block out the sun with chemtrails and all that kind of stuff.
Chemtrails, yeah.
Oh,
So many of these things that scientists are proposing as theories, but also as they're trying to execute them, whether it's fighting against global warming and all that kind of stuff, they are literally fighting against natural law.
Yeah.
And so obviously that's why it's creating so many calamities. But a lot of the stuff that we see, we don't interpret it as, just instinctually, we don't interpret it as what it actually is or what caused it. So that early picture I showed you of Monument Valley, you can take a piece of wood, it's called fractal scarring, you take an anode and a cathode, plant them at either side of a piece of wood, get it really wet. Water's a big component of all this electrical stuff. And as you turn it on, it scars the wood, it carves the wood electrically towards each other. A lot of what you see in the landscape around you is not these gradual geography
that
described
explains
events.
Grand Canyon.
They are electrically caused environments. Grand Canyon, Monument Valley. If you again zoom out and look at and just open
big
your mind
picture.
to imagining what this bigger picture could be. You look at that tip of South America to Antarctica and the shape, and you think, what if a storm just pushed that shape of an entire mountain range being formed in a singular storm event? The Earth was created far differently than what we're told. And that,
Well, think about when Christ was crucified and the earth changed. I mean, a lot of these things could have happened at that time
Yeah.
when God was angered and struck the earth.
I think, I have an article from clear back in the 80s from, I think Reed Bankhead was a BYU professor.
Okay.
And it was all about evolution, and he just said, why do all these scientists, why don't they think that somebody could have just come and created the Grand Canyon in a very cataclysmic event, when we know cataclysmic events have existed since the beginning instead of all these years, goes into the total Darwinian, but he's also deferring to God could have done this in an instant.
exactly.
It's been done, so why are they
Yeah.
just ignoring all of that?
Again, it's because they are fighting against a paradigm that would confirm Scripture.
That's right. That's
Exactly.
the
They're
agenda.
satanic in their
Yeah.
godlessness.
Here's another little one. This is the Sapphire Project I
Robin
talked
had,
about.
Well, it was just looking at that cataclysmic kind of thing.
Yeah.
When you're driving up Provo Canyon, if you look to the right, there's all the sediment, you know, you can kind of see it. But there is one that it just goes up and bends at like just a 90-degree angle, you know, and you're like, okay, the sediment, but that seemed like
That's one reason I love.
molding. You know, it's just-
yes.
That's one reason I love electric universe theory. So the Thunderbolts Project has that video called Cracks in Theory, and they go through all these different evidences of just cataclysms would create this not sediment layer deposit.
Yeah.
And
But it would have to
shaping of
warm
those
it up
lines
or
and-
do something to make it pliable
Yeah.
to take something hard.
And a lot of these storms they theorized were supersonic winds and heating rock to extreme degrees where it was
Yeah.
throwing rock, granite, as essentially a melted bubble. And then it would land and it turns into the shapes you see all over southern Utah. You see these shapes of like a granite rock as a perfect circle with a little bit of a flat bottom. It's like a cooled piece of glass.
Wow.
And it's,
Highland Valley.
imagine these massive structures being thrown by storms that were so powerful that it would literally move a mountain.
Well, I mean, God took matter and put it together, and all this is going on, isn't, I mean,
Well, it's on a
in
smaller
massive
scale,
heat and.
you know, I was telling him that, like, my cut Achilles, and they said, you know, it'll take a year or so to get that really healed. And it's totally healed, you guys, like, it's done, and it's 3 months. But I was using that, it looks like a pizza oven with the, and it's heated
Double
ceramic, but it's micro, what did I tell you? Electromagnetic
Yeah.
is the type of stuff, and so I think, because I'm over there with other people with physical therapy, and they are much longer down the thing
Yeah.
and not doing what I'm doing, so I think that we're using
Well,
that
we
kind of
are-
science, but they reject it, it's Japanese
Japanese
technology.
Nikan has done the earth energies, the sun energies, you know, with
Wow.
the
Yeah.
far
Well, their
infrared
scientists aren't being
treatment,
held back
for years.
by
Well,
some of the
again,
things that
they're
we're
denying
having.
religious principles taught
And natural
as
science.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite verses that I like to interpret a little twisted. All spirit is matter, but more refined and pure. All matter, to me, therefore flip that, all matter is spirit, but less refined and coarse. So what is spirit, what is matter? Everything is made of energy at certain frequencies and wavelengths of light. Light and energy is creating all matter. So we are just at a certain frequency of that. If you think of the Empire State Building's size, if that was the light spectrum, what we can see would be a grain of rice at the bottom. That's the scale of visible light versus existing light. So
Are you saying that is what actually exists, and what we
So,
can see is the great?
what we see is the visible light.
Okay.
An existing light scale, frequency of that light is the Empire State Building in variation from that little bit we can see.
Wow, amazing.
So stuff exists on wavelengths we can't see, which is why we can't see spirit, which is why we can't see the Birkeland currents of energy traveling through space, pinching and creating stars as matter gets organized. All of these kinds of things are real, understandable principles of law, of natural law, of nature, of science, but we're taught a corrupted version by men wearing black robes and cube
Will you say
hats.
that
and-
again? All spirit is matter, which one is more
So,
refined?
so all spirit is matter. The scripture says all spirit is matter, but is more refined and pure. And then I invert that, totally my opinion, take it with a grain of salt. I invert that to say all matter is spirit, but less refined and coarse. So we're going through a purifying fire of life, a refining of our character, but there will also be a need to refine our actual physical nature, where we won't have blood, we'll have plasma. We'll be existing at different states. There may be other planets in orbit we can't see because they're at a different light spectrum than we can see. There may be objects around us we can't see. Spirits on Earth, in the spirit world, we can't see because we're not visually able to comprehend that light spectrum.
We know our matter is
Up and-
heavier and vibrates much slower than
Exactly.
other things.
Which is also part
Heavy.
of electroculture, it's part of electrical healing. And if you can understand that all of these sciences are connected, all these principles relate to each other, then it's just science that doesn't get researched because there's not a lot of money in it.
So how do you not study for
Tesla.
evaluating?
Could you go to the next slide?
So this is the Sapphire Project. They're another group that's really fun. They're studying how the sun works. It's not a nuclear furnace, because nuclear furnaces, what explosions get stronger the further away they go.
Yeah.
My son said that there's all kinds of solar flares activity going on with the sun right now that's affecting the earth,
Yeah.
and that we could see cataclysmic problems
Between the sun
coming.
flares and sunspots, it affects us.
Yeah, and it's directly related to earthquakes and other occurrences
Yeah.
on Earth. Storms as well, which is why it's so bad that they try to create HARPA, where they're manipulating weather with electrical events.
Yeah.
So, but they're studying how the sun is an electrical body conducting. One fun thing about their theories is that the sun's photosphere is much larger than the physical sun, and that anciently Saturn would have had a photosphere that the Earth would have resided inside of. So that gets all those myths of the purple hue of the happy hunting ground, of constant light, constant humidity, that there wasn't rain before the flood, just essentially an atmosphere of the sun. And there are proof now from James Webb telescopes and other telescopes of celestial bodies existing inside of a sun's photosphere. So echo that to now, and you would have the sun created with light before you could see stars and planets and moons. So the creation periods make more sense in an electric universe paradigm of first creation of light, then a separation of stars and moons and suns.
I'm grateful for all of this evidence, because it's self-evident, and it helps push our imaginations to claiming the blessings that we live far beneath, with the priesthood and in how to organize things and be creators. Glenn and Chase Kimball years ago, he's known for a lot. The Kolob, let's see, what is it? It's a certain Bible. Anyway, he did Hidden Stories of the Childhood of Jesus. And I listened about, 15 years ago, to a series that he and his brother Chase, he's a PhD, he's got all kinds of titles, but they went into ancient manuscripts and they talked about the technologies that they had with moving things with sound. Like it's understandable in Peru and some of these places, these ancients had technologies that we don't know, which we talked about in our Egyptian classes and things like that.
Levitating rocks and and that's one of the fun things, is understanding some of this ancient connection can help explain. Some of this stuff becomes, it's not that it becomes less mysterious, but that you can appreciate the mystery, you can relate to the mystery. And so that's where a lot of this symbolism, one of the fun things is the days of the week. Again, these are just random slides, so forgive they're being chaotic. What was the Sabbath day? It was Saturn's day. Friday was Freya's day, which is Norse for Venus.
How cute, that's great.
Thor's day for Jupiter, again, another name for God. So the days of the week actually correlate again to the celestial worship. A couple other slides, I'm just going to get through a few of these. A couple other slides. The boat of Ra, again, is that crescent shape as the sun sits in heaven. You'll see that a lot on the papyrus. The snake is a theme, again, in this plasma story. Dragons, as an archetype, were always heaven-based. So yes, there were dinosaurs, but dragons were usually depicted as a heaven creature, and the shapes align with some of these plasma events.
My brother served a mission in Thailand, and the tour guide that took them to some of these temples, he said most people think this is a dragon with scales, but it's really feathers. It's a feathered serpent.
Yeah. So a lot of those discharges had that kind of feel to it. And again, you have that symbol of the temple where the angel with the rays behind her is holding a plant that has those similar feather-like rays coming off. So a lot of that symbolism, again, relates to thing after thing. The crescent star, I'm going to blow through a couple of these kind of quicker. is kind of all over. There's a good quote from Talmage about geology, and I like to read it with a little bit of sarcasm, where he's like, all this stuff that people think of this long story, such a fascinating story, but let's not undermine the scripture when we look at the way they describe geology. And I think maybe the last one I'll get to is, well, maybe again, you have the church bringing out a symbol of the church that is the square coming to the circle, the arch, creating the representation of the heaven man, whose arms are now stretched down.
Gate.
All of these are both celestial symbols and symbols of Christ. And when we can appreciate both layers, we can understand that the earth ascending to a better sphere is a spiritual principle, a geometrical principle, an actual cosmological principle.
Very interesting.
And a couple fun videos. Thunderbolts Project has some documentaries called Symbols of an Alien Sky. That's a really fun one for connecting a lot of these ancient myths and a lot of these ancient depictions. They relate a lot of the crescent shape, yes, but symbol after symbol. I could spend hours getting into all the minutiae, the pine cones, the seashells.
Oh, yeah.
The crowns that now become the crowns for kings. This is the video that has the fun Mars sanding rather than erosion-based theory of its shaping.
So go to Symbols of an Alien Sky and you can watch all these.
Right, they have a few fun documentaries. They do another one on meteors that just gets into all these moons and comets and meteors that have similar electrical scarring. And again, they used to think comets were just these ice balls, and then they sent up a satellite and shot like a missile at one, and instead of exploding, it just thudded into rock. And they're like, why is that not ice? Because these essentially have been ripped from other planets during massive storms and turned into moons and comets. So now a lot of our celestial bodies are the result of the clash of the titans, of the wars that have gone on in heaven. So, and that's...
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Give a double clap. Very good.
That was excellent. Did they fly to terrestrial? I don't believe it.
Whoops, I went out.
So, I believe they
I was
were
gonna
in a
name this one.
celestial state
Hang on.
of living.
Answer it out
No, no,
loud.
Okay.
So, I'm a big fan of the
Why
Adam
isn't
being
it?
God doctrine from Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. Adam is our heavenly Father. That Eve
That
was
was
his
last
wife.
week, right?
That they were also born of parentages and had an earthly experience and were exalted, then were literally on an earth, placed on this earth to seed it with life. Not evolution from any other species, but
Right.
liteally
Right,
the
you won't argue that.
literal descendants of God. So they existed in a celestial sphere that allowed them to be living forever. Then in the
Your air
fall
turned off.
of this celestial sphere from the orbit, it created not only the atmosphere of the capability of death, but the introduction of time, things like that.
So I guess I'm thinking of the description of the temple where they're living in the Garden of Eden where fruits and flowers grew spontaneously. That doesn't seem to line up with a description of the celestial world that's all glass and crystal, etc. And then they said they left and they were sent into a world where they had to work by the sweat of their brow.
Yeah.
That doesn't line up with a description of the millennium on a terrestrial sphere either.
Sure.
So that's wouldn't premortality possibly count as that celestial level? Adam and Eve were there, they were placed in the garden as an intermediate state to introduce humanity into the world.
Yeah.
That's
So
kind
I
of what
don't-
makes more sense to
And
me.
again, this is theories.
Yeah, just
right?
a thought.
So the Earth, I don't think was a celestial sphere, but was in the orbit of a celestial
Right, and I don't
sphere.
think premortality necessarily was on this earth.
So I think the creation of the Earth, the creation of life on it, all that kind of stuff was essentially, again, in the orbit of this other sphere. And all the animals, all the other species were placed here, just like Adam and Eve were. They're
Yeah.
descendants of. And so you have, again, no introduction of death, but you have the creation of plants. You have the creation of animals. They did, I think, eat during that time period of the Garden of Eden. You have all the other cultures that have the depictions of the happy hunting ground. The whole reason we don't work on Sunday, so that used to be Saturn's Day, was to remember that time period where you didn't have to work for your food, it just grew. And you wouldn't need to eat animals because the plants would give you any nutrition you could need.
And that's just how they describe the millennium on a terrestrial sphere.
And then you separate from that, well, how, if we live 100 years, did Adam live 1,000, did all these other people live 1,000 years, is because the fall was not a fall from where the earth was to where it is now. I think there was an intermediate step.
That may be true. I mean, I have no way to address that.
Yeah, and that's again, based on some of these theories. I think it was a celestial, terrestrial, telestial, and then we'll have to go back. Similar patterns.